Hey folks, thanks for coming over to Capitalism for Good. This is a part of a larger project where I am on a mission to interview 100 business leaders about the positive impact that they have on their internal and external communities. It is through these interviews that we will dig into how we can use the ways in which we make and spend our dollars in order to benefit the greater good. Folks, and today we have Chelsey Simpson, co-owner of the Urban Agrarian in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Urban Agrarian is a local food hub that is in the city. She's also an editor for Edible OKC magazine. I'll put links for both of those in the show notes as well as other mentions of note so that you can check in, find, follow, support, all of those kinds of things. She was just so great to speak to, and she was just so generous with her time and sharing her experiences. We talk about how she comes from just generations of farmers and what it's like to be a local farmer throughout history, including in today's world, and all of kind of the dynamics that go into that. We talk about how she became the co-owner of Urban Agrarian and what that looks like. She educates me on the differences and similarities of food hubs, co-ops, CSAs, and she also gets into the difference of for-profit and nonprofit business structures. We talk about community building and how all of this really made an impact on her personally as a human being. We talk about the struggles and the joys and really everything in between. There is just so much that we also didn't even get to within a limited amount of time. I highly encourage you to check her out and see what she's doing. I can only imagine what the future will hold for her. And with that, I'll just let her jump in and take over. Enjoy. The story version of your resume that got you to where you are now as co-owner of Urban Agrarian.
Sure. I think the important place to start is that I grew up on a small family dairy farm here in Oklahoma, and my family specifically settled in southern Oklahoma when Oklahoma was newly being settled by white people, essentially. So we benefited from systems that took land away from Native people. Ultimately, my family, Oklahoma was settled in a very intentional in a purposeful, what's the right word for it? Aggressive. You could use all kinds of words, but we didn't just slowly move into Oklahoma once the government opened it for white settlement. It was a land rush and it was a land drawing, and organized also isn't the right word for it. So some combination of all these aggressive, chaotic, organized, systematic things. But my family was part of that in southwestern Oklahoma, and we got a parcel of land how many years ago now? Well over 100, obviously, maybe 120. I'd have to think about that for a minute. But at any rate, so I came from a long line of farmers, and my dad specifically, though, I watched him struggle to maintain the family farm. And there were multiple properties in my family, more than one homestead that I saw as very important to who I was as a kid and as a young person. I saw those homesteads as part of my heritage and part of what was important to who I was. And so watching my father struggle to maintain ownership of them, I watched him sell his dairy herd, shift his business, really on the brink of not being able to be a farmer at all. And that made a big impression on me. And my grandfather retired as older people do. And so I just saw this diminishing way of life very close at hand. And I'd also seen how nice that way of life can be close at hand. When I was real young, I lived on the same farm as my grandparents. And essentially, we lived in a little house up the hill. My grandparents lived in a little house down the hill. And so I saw the value in the stories they told about how the community used to be. My dad remembers going into town with his father to sell the milk in cans and get an ice cream cone from Lucille's Creamery. And it felt like this interconnected thing that was slowly disappearing. And I didn't think to myself as a teenager or even a college student, like, oh, I'm gonna go out and I'm gonna major in sustainability or food systems. I mean, frankly, not only did my school not have a degree I could get in food systems, I could have studied ag, but I don't think anybody 20 years, very few schools, if any schools, more than 20 years ago, 25 years ago, had degrees in food systems.
Yeah.
And so I didn't think, oh, this is going to be my career. I thought, well, I'm going to be a writer.
Mm.
And I was also a lover of stories. And so that is what I pursued. I got a degree in creative writing. But as soon as I got out of college, I got a degree with a magazine. Sorry, I got a position with a magazine as an editor. And my husband and I, we were college sweethearts and got married after college, and we moved to Oklahoma City. And I found pretty early on, within a few months of moving to Oklahoma City, I found an organization called the Oklahoma Food Cooperative. And they were pretty new at the time. It was a pioneering organization that was trying to connect consumers with local farms through the internet, which was, this was, say, 2005-ish. And so they were there. The internet aspect of it was pioneering. And so was the idea that we would spread local food access across Oklahoma through this system. Mm-hmm. And so it wasn't a cooperative for consumers or a cooperative for producers. It was a cooperative where everyone was a cooperative member. So it wasn't a bargaining cooperative. That's how a lot of cooperatives are organized. Like, I'm going to get a better deal. This was a cooperative just to make business possible. So I got involved with that because I thought, from the moment I read about it in another magazine, actually, here locally, from the moment I read about it, I thought, well, there's a way that I can help. And that was really the jumping off point for a lot of different aspects of my career. So since then, I've worked for a couple of different nonprofits, and I worked for the two nationals. So sometimes I still National Young Farmers Coalition, most recently before Urban Agrarian, and before that I worked for the National Farm to School Network. Okay. And I had a magazine job in there in the mix too. So I worked in communications for these places. But it was with the Oklahoma Food Co-op, that very first organization, that I first learned more and more about the food system and what was going on and who was trying to fix it. And that's also where I met my friend, Matt. Matt Birch is the founder of Urban Agrarian, the business that I now co-own. And we struck up a friendship, what is now more than 15 years ago, probably going on 20 years ago, through the Oklahoma Food Co-op. He was, I think, the co-op's first employee, and I was a volunteer and on the board, and we became friends, and that friendship lasted. And when he was struggling with Urban Agrarian, how many years later, 10 years later or so, that's more than 10 or 11 years in, he was really struggling and came to the point of deciding to shut down the business. And that's when he felt like there was just a glimmer of hope for saving the business. And that's when he asked me to join him. So there's the long story that started with, 120 years ago or 140 years ago, my forefathers settled on a farm, and now here I am. So
yeah, I am curious. Are you comfortable talking about like the specifics of the struggles of either your family being farmers, or even the things that like Matt was experiencing before he hit the point of like, okay, this just isn't working? Like, there's a lot that's changed in our worlds that probably impacted that. Can we talk some specifics about that?
I love specifics. So specifically, there were personal and professional things that made it hard for my father to maintain his dairy herd. And I will just acknowledge too that for my dad, his cows were a big deal to him. Not only were they his livelihood, but the way a lot of farm families would start out is, or how they would start their children in their profession, is that they might give them 1 or 2 cows when they're, let's say, 9 or 10 years old. And so my father's herd really started from some animals that his father had given to him when he was very young. And he had grown them. He even had designed a software program in the 80s to help manage breeding. These are mammals, and we're depending on managing their lactation cycles and all kinds of things. So it's you get a lot into the science of all that if you're a dairy farmer. Not to mention the science of milk. I mean, there are my uncle, I believe, has a degree in dairy science. There's a lot going on with dairy farming.
Yeah.
And I'll just say that as a side note. And so for my dad to have to sell his cows was a really big deal, even though he didn't sell his land. Not only did that mean he ceased to be a dairy farmer, but he was having to pass up on this entire thing that he built for decades of his life. So, but why? So why did he? There were several things going on. For one, I'm going to get the years a little mixed up here, but there's been a slow shift across decades in America of all agriculture getting bigger.
Yeah.
And dairy farms in particular started getting really massive. And I don't know exactly when this shift started happening. Let's say probably late 80s into early 90s. We get into and maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe mega dairies developed in the 70s, but I think that my father started to see the impact of this sometime around then. Mm-hmm. Dairy farms were very big, industrialized systems, not pasture-based systems necessarily. And so several things happened. Feed prices were high, milk prices got low. There's international trade that happens here that influences the prices of all of this.
Yeah.
So there's a lot going on around these times, that involved in this. And dairy farming had been profitable. I think it's important to note that when my dad had decided to make dairy farming his career, he did so because it was so lucrative in the 80s. That had a lot to do, I think, with some international, with things happening internationally, and nationally around milk pricing. Yeah. So, but he left college, in fact, and decided to farm full time. So it's not as if this was a foregone conclusion that this would not be a sustainable career path. It had been, but so we've got feed prices involved, we've got milk prices involved. The price of cattle themselves fluctuates a lot. And with increasingly large dairies in the mix, that changed a lot of things. Mm. And so there also is a problem where it's like a race to the bottom. The fewer small dairies you have, the milk companies that will pick up that milk, let's say you want to be organic and you want to work with Organic Valley. If they don't have a truck that's coming through your area to pick up your milk on a regular basis, you basically cannot work with them. So and the same goes with the conventional operation. The fewer dairies there are, the less sustainable of a business it is, because the trucks that come around and pick up the milk are not going to drive 40 miles out of their way. All of these things were happening, and probably more I don't know about. And on top of that, my parents got divorced, and that was a big hit for my dad, emotionally, financially. So there was we saw a lot of dairies close in Oklahoma, around the same time, but all of those factors played a part.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I have so many questions. So I'm thinking of trying to go from, you've got these individual small dairy farms or farms in general that have been passed down through generation. I mean, I go back to you talking about it was a part of the family tradition to pass down cows from generation to generation. And that is skills, it's wealth, it's traditions, it's knowledge, it's all of these things kind of wrapped up into one idea. But yet there's also, and you're competing against these big giant dairy farms that are there, but there's a middle ground there that I imagine is helpful in kind of creating some stability and some structure of being able to work with or knowledge share or whatever it is to support one another, whether it's across different farms or with farms to stores or anything like that. From your perspective and kind of watching all of those things, how do you see the kind of community aspect of the middle ground before it gets too giant to where it's squeezing out all of these small family farms? How do you see that middle ground looking?
Are you asking about a current path for small or mid-sized dairies?
Yeah.
Yeah, that definitely exists. if I don't quite answer your question, you can redirect me. But there is a path. For example, at Urban Agrarian, we work with Merrick Family Farms, and this is someone about my age who took over his family's dairy farm, and is he set up his own bottling operation, and it's hugely popular in here in Oklahoma City. I say hugely popular, but on the scale of our products, it's our best. The milk is our best selling thing always year round, essentially. And he's doing really well in creating a product that's really desirable. And so they are one of two dairies that I'm aware of that are doing that here in Oklahoma currently, but there are other communities in other places. Some of them are more traditional dairy communities in Wisconsin or Vermont that have more dairies like this, and even smaller ones perhaps than his. And I think a lot of times sometimes that middle ground is found by living in a place where there's still a density of dairies and someone like Horizon or Organic Valley, and they don't have to be organic, but these smaller people can still work together. But a lot of times it's also found through doing their own on-farm bottling, processing, cheese making. There were one or two dairies that I knew when I lived in New York that they might have had a herd of 6 cattle that they milked, and really small, but they made something sustainable for themselves by making beautiful cheese and other products. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it brings up a good kind of also point that it might be helpful is, can you get into like what is urban agrarian? Like I think this is
Yeah,
a good spot to be like,
that's a good
okay,
question.
what are you doing there? What would people need to know about kind of your purpose and your mission there?
Yeah. So what the heck am I doing now? And I'll circle back on your question about what caused urban agrarian, like why did urban
Yeah.
agrarian almost shut down? So my friend Matt started Urban Agrarian in 2008, and really what we are today is a primarily a locally sourced grocery store and a food hub. We've always identified as a food hub, and we've done different food hub type activities over the past many years. But a food hub, for anybody that doesn't know, is an organization that aggregates and then distributes local food. And there are different components to that. We also have a retail store. So being a retail store doesn't automatically make you a food hub, but we sell to some wholesale clients. We also have a kitchen. That's a component of some food hubs. So we have a commercial kitchen where we take food, local food, and make products. So you can buy, an Italian wedding soup, or you can buy a green chili chicken enchilada. Our burritos are wildly popular at the moment. And those products rose out of trying to make sure there was no waste in our food, as little waste as possible. We always have waste, but as little waste as possible in our food system. So we use our kitchen to preserve things. One of our best examples of that is that we make salsa out of the tomatoes that don't sell. So we are a little grocery store. So we have about 1,000 square feet in the front of our warehouse near downtown Oklahoma City that serves as our grocery store. It's open 7 days a week, year round. And we also, the rest of our building is a warehouse where we do our receiving. It's where our commercial kitchen is. We sell to a handful of different restaurants and other wholesale clients. And we also do online sales. So you can get a grocery subscription box from us, and we do some a la carte online purchasing. We're even on Instacart. So you can interface with us in a lot of the ways that you would a normal grocery store. We're a little bit like a farmer's market. We work with about 60 different local producers, and I'm always proud of that, across a year. And so that's not just farms, it's a lot of farms, but it's also people making cheese and jam and pasta and bread and other products.
Can you talk a little bit about, I think it might be helpful for folks who aren't in that field. And also just personally, one of the things I thought of is, what is the difference, or are there differences between things like a food hub versus, you talked about co-ops earlier. And then I also kind of thought of like the CSAs, your crop share associations. Like, what are the differences and overlaps between those three? And maybe there are other kind of popular terms, but those are the ones that I think I come across most
Sure.
often.
Yeah, well, I'll mention the co-op question first. So you can be a food hub and a cooperative. You can be
Okay.
a retail store and a cooperative and a food hub. You can be, so the cooperative is really a business organizing definition. So in the world of things like this, you typically have things that are businesses, let's say LLCs like we are.
Mhm.
You have cooperatives, which are how to even define. I think most people know what cooperatives are, but they're owned by the community or maybe a community of workers. There's a group ownership aspect. It's different from an LLC.
Mhm.
And then there are nonprofits, and I think we all know what nonprofits are. And so these are fundamental business organizing tools. And all of those entities might behave to the casual observer in identical ways, really.
Yeah.
I often say urban agrarian. Well, we've even considered making urban agrarian either a cooperative or a nonprofit. We've
Mm.
considered all of these things. I will just say we are not, as of yet, after all these years, we are not a profitable business. And
Mm.
so we behave in a lot of ways
Yeah.
like a nonprofit. And I think nonprofits often behave like business, like there's these things really have to do with how you're paying your taxes and how you're thinking about yourself also, and what your goals are for profit and who you're sharing that profit with. So that's a big thing, defining those different entities. And I didn't start Urban Agrarian, Matt did, and he set it up as a business. And I can come back to that in a minute. But the other definitions you were asking about a food hub, there are food hubs in the United States that are businesses, food hubs that are nonprofits, and food hubs that are
Mm.
cooperatives. And so that food hub piece can fit any of those. The food hub piece is like, are you aggregating and distributing, and how are you doing it? Food hubs also take a lot of different shapes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. I am it, actually, I think where it might be helpful to go is that profitability piece. And
Mm,
like I I notice, and I wonder if you've also seen this within the refill community that you're connected to. And we talked about Cal that was owning the bookstore that we spoke to in Capitalism for Good earlier. Um, a lot of these types of stores, and I imagine it's similar these days for a lot of different kinds of small local businesses in general, that profit margin
mm.
seems to be smaller and smaller and just kind of a struggle to stay on top of. Are there things that you guys have done and tried that have helped out that process, even though you said you're still kind of struggling in that area, but like are there things that have really worked well
Mhm.
to try to help with that stability that you think might like be good advice or pieces for other folks to replicate? Or
Well,
maybe things like lesson learned, stay away from that, didn't work at all.
I think, I don't think there are any lessons learned, but to answer this, I think I'll also be able to answer your question about why did Urban Agrarian nearly
Mm.
shut down 8 or 9 years ago. And I think the only lesson learned here is you're always going to be a little afraid to let go of something, but
Mm.
sometimes you've got to let go of the things that aren't working. And this is something, I think, all business owners, this is sort of business 101 stuff, but it's still really hard to do. You get really invested, like think about my dad and his cows. You can be just as invested in some aspect of your business, even if you're not shutting down the whole business. So Urban Agrarian's journey has sort of looked like this. My friend Matt started the business, and I knew him around the time he did. We were doing different work at the time, but he really started the business with a goal of connecting restaurants with local food systems. That was a big foundation of Urban Agrarian early on. And he also wanted to directly connect with customers, but he initially did that through a series of pop-up markets, and the business
Mm.
was very mobile early on. He literally started it out of his garage. I think he had a Volkswagen Jetta wagon or something. So I think the same wagon was eventually stolen by an
Oh, wow.
employee. It was like, it's been quite the journey of ups and downs, but, very scrappy beginnings for Urban Agrarian, just rounding up food in whatever vehicle he had and going out there. And so, but the early focus was on restaurants. And this is classic food hub stuff, aggregating food, distributing it as a wholesaler. And then he grew the business over several years, moved into the space that we're in now that has a full warehouse and had a permanent storefront. So retail became an important component of the business pretty early on. But when was this? Like 2017? I'm so bad at remembering numbers.
Same. And it's getting worse the older I get.
It's no good at all. But around then he was just having such a hard time making ends meet, making payroll work. He had a lot of really positive things going on. Urban Agrarian had actually quite a few, relative to its size, quite a few employees at that time. He had people managing wholesale accounts. He had catering contracts. He had an exciting contract with Cadillac to host a series of farm-to-table dinners, thriving kitchen that was doing all kinds of interesting things, but it was just still not financially secure. And what we know now, it's hard to decide the order to tell this story, but what Matt and I know now is that really he was a hair's breadth away from being in an okay spot at that point. He didn't have any relationship with banks. So he didn't have any relationship to extra capital or credit. He had borrowed money over time. He started out with a loan of just $5,000 from his grandpa. But he'd had some other investors here and there, but he didn't have a great relationship with anybody that he could go to and say, look, I need a line of credit. And that was not a world of things that he was very fluent in, or that I was. I mean, I wasn't, when I started out with the business. In fact, as a side note, Urban Agrarian is the first business that I've ever worked for as an adult. I had only worked for cooperatives and nonprofits. Yeah. So neither of us came to this with a fluency in financial systems. No MBAs here. But he woke up one day and the stress of making this whole complicated system run was just really weighing on him. He looked and saw that there wasn't enough money in the bank for payroll. And he didn't have any business partners that, official partners in the LLC at that time. He had a lot of people he worked closely with that you might have considered partners, but he didn't have any partners in the LLC. So it was really just his decision to say, I can't move forward. But that decision, I'll be honest, and he's said this many times, our bank account hasn't been in worse shape over the last 5 years than it was when he decided to close the business 8 years ago. We've woken up and looked at our bank account and said, look, we're $5,000 in the hole. What on earth is going to happen next? What do we do here? He wasn't even in, he wasn't in as bad a spot then, really, but he kind of hit a personal breaking point, I think. But his notice that he was closing the business was met with such attention and sadness by the community that people came out of the woodwork saying, well, how do we save this business? So that's where the business had a chance to start again. And I am getting back to your point of like, what works? Yeah. What do you let go of? So Matt initially thought he was letting go of the whole shebang.
Right.
But he also, one thing that arose out of that is that somebody approached him and said, look, I think that you've got a chance to make this profitable if you have not one store, but 2 stores. So what if you use the same warehouse food hub situation, but you supply 2 retail locations? And a really positive person in our community had a space that they were willing to rent and said, hey, come and try this out. And so that was really kind of the seed of where Matt was able to get the motivation, honestly, and to start fundraising towards building the business up instead of shutting the business down. It's funny when you go to raise money for something, you can have nothing at all. You can have an idea and some blueprints. You can have no physical infrastructure, but if you've got an idea and a business plan, you might raise, there are people that raise $1 million plus on nothing physical. But if you're in the middle of something and it's not going well, And you're like,
Mm-hmm.
look, I've got all this infrastructure. I've got inventory. I've got employees. I've got systems. I've got a truck.
Yeah.
I have all of this. And they're like, but, they want to see like, what are you going to do to change it?
Mm-hmm.
What's the next thing? You can't just be, it's hard to say, I'm almost there. Can I please raise $30,000? That's a hard space to be in. So
Mm-hmm.
having this promise that, well, what if there were two retail stores? This
Yeah.
promise of change. So what Matt decided, you asked, what did we do that's worked over time? And there's two things that we've let go of over time.
Mm.
The first one that he decided to let go of was the food hub. Not the food hub, the distribution, not the,
Oh, okay.
the distribution piece. So he really saw that trying to deliver to restaurants was not profitable. Restaurants struggled to pay on time. The
Mm.
logistics were frustrating. Some of the orders were small. And so we could still be a food hub and connect with some large wholesale clients. But this idea that we were going to sell to, I think over time, he'd had something like 200 different restaurant clients across the state. Maybe I'm remembering that number wrong.
Yeah. Still
But he
impressive.
decided to shift. And so Urban Agrarian was no longer going to have this restaurant and catering wing that we
Mm.
focused on. Moving forward, we were going to really focus on retail grocery.
Yeah.
And this is the point where I got involved. And I'll just say, if anybody listening wants to know, the way I actually got involved is that have still, through my whole career, been a journalist. And I had, through knowing Matt, knowing what was going on with him, I pitched a story to a publication called New Food Economy. And I think if you Google Chelsey Simpson and New Food Economy and Urban Agrarian, you can still find this article out there. But it's one of my pieces I've been most proud of. I interviewed Matt for a couple hours and I wrote this piece kind of chronicling where he was. And this was a national online publication. But I wrote it about kind of what I was just saying, the fact that, especially if you're in middle America and not on the coasts, it's really hard to raise the money you need to function well
Yeah.
as a business. And so I was living in New York City at the time, working for a nonprofit. And I remember going to these meetups for people in the food world, and people were pitching what I'm just going to be honest and say were ridiculous things. Like they'd say, look, we've got $6 million in investment for our tabletop composter. Look at us. And I will admit to being disgusted
Mm-hmm.
because there were farmers I knew that would have benefited from $5,000 in their hoop house. There were businesses like Urban Agrarian that did benefit from investments of $5,000 for their first, the first truck. And there were these ways to make a big impact in the food community with relatively small investment. And instead, what was happening in large part was just this money getting sucked to the coast. And this is a simplification of,
Right.
but it is also part of what was happening. You're in these communities and you're just around more money. You're around the people with money. And so I wrote an article that touched on those things. And in the course of doing that, had long conversations with Matt, who I had not caught up with in great depth up to then,
Yeah.
long conversations about the business. And that's when he was like, hey, would you help me? Would you come aboard this sinking ship that I just set on fire? So there was no financial investment I made in Urban Agrarian.
Okay.
I did not buy in. I did not rescue it with my own money. I had no money. I was working for a nonprofit
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and the daughter of a failed dairy farm. So just to be clear,
Yeah.
I had no money,
Yeah.
but I think it was generous and smart of Matt to offer to make me a co-owner, because from the beginning, he was not my boss. And that made a situation where we could make decisions, I think, in a different way.
Hearing you talk about the money on the coast, I also was thinking of money in these big, large corporations versus, again, your smaller middle America local businesses. And I think that that is a really good example of what the lay of the land is right now, specifically when Matt was saying that Urban Agrarian might close, and then the community rallies around to say, how do we help keep you open? And I was thinking about this competition between all of these small local restaurants that might not be able to pay regularly that are impacting his businesses and all of these different components of that really kind of boil down to competition between your small local businesses versus these large corporations that can have these apparently very cheap products out there that are on the surface saying, hey, we're going to be able to save you money. We're going to be able to help you out in your financial position, whether or not that's like an outright thing
Right.
that they're saying, compared to sometimes I think looking at like a local business or something that is more sustainable, like it's often looked at as your more expensive option, whether it is or not, or your less convenient option or whatever it is. But like, I think that that is a good example of what today's kind of the geography of our economy looks like and
Yeah.
the struggles versus it's also beloved by your community. And when
Mhm.
he says, you know, this might go away, and the community says, I don't want it to go away. How do we keep you open? And you're like, well, you keep us open by coming back and like shopping local and like,
Got here.
but it's tough if you're that one person who's like, I've got 15 minutes and I have $15, and how do you get it
Mhm.
um to be to make all of those things work? And I wonder what your take is on just that piece of urban agrarian actually being that like conduit and that vehicle to help out those local businesses and to feed your local people and to help your local farmers and be that kind of like network hub, that food hub in kind of competition with all of your outside factors.
Yeah. You know, there's a place for big businesses. You know, it's one of the toughest things for me to answer, just as somebody who's thought a lot about food systems and how things
Yeah.
get better over time. One of the toughest things I wrestle with internally is this question of, you know, is it good or bad when an entity like Walmart dives into sourcing organic, for example?
Hmm.
If it's certainly, in my opinion, it's certainly not bad, you know, but there's a conversation happening about what's greenwashing, you know,
Hmm.
what's genuine organic, what's meaningful change, where are we making change? And I think it's both nice. Well, it's nice to recognize that a business like Urban Agrarian is trying to affect change in a number of different ways. So there are people that are interested in shopping with us, might be interested in showing up for this broad variety of reasons. So some of them are interested in organic food. Some of them are interested in healthy food. Some of them want to support local farms. Some of them want to support those local farms because of the food miles and how far things have been shipped and carbon, and some of them want to buy just the best food that they can find, which we believe we're providing.
Yeah.
And so there's this myriad of things going on, and we're also trying, you know, like, and we're trying to do a myriad of good. We're trying to avoid food waste. We're trying to be good to people. We're trying, you know, there's all of this happening. And so an entity like Walmart, if they're buying organic, it's like, well, okay, maybe some good is happening over here, because maybe we're diverting some chemicals from the water supply through this organic focus that you're doing. But meanwhile, what's happening with those farm workers on those same farms? What's happening with your own employees? It's like it's all very complicated.
Yeah.
A
Yeah.
big business can have a much bigger impact than an entity like Urban Agrarian. And what if Urban Agrarian was really successful and we
Hmm.
grew and grew? At what point would we cease to be good? You know,
Right.
at
Yeah.
what point would we cease to be able to do good? This is not exactly answering your question, but I'm just acknowledging that these are difficult questions to wrestle with, because there's a real ceiling that we would hit at Urban Agrarian in our ability to source local food. If
Mm.
our business even quadrupled, I don't know, which frankly I kind of need it to, you know,
Yeah.
or that would be great.
Yeah.
But trying to get the food supply to rise with me would be a chicken and egg scenario.
Yeah.
And so if business quadrupled, let's say I was really successful with my marketing and it quadrupled in 18 months, we'll give it a semi long leash. The food supply would not be there with me.
Mhm.
Yeah, we would outgrow the current capacity. I would have to convince a good handful of farmers to grow more for, and that takes a while.
Yeah.
So let's see. How do I get back to where you were, what you were asking me?
I think that that's a good example, though, that like these types of questions and thoughts and structures are difficult, and there is no perfect solution. I
Yeah.
mean, I think of earlier in this project, Lindsay McCoy, who is the founder of Plain Products. It's a closed loop shampoo and like hair care brand. And her whole thing was like, it's progress, not perfection. Like
Mm,
there are pieces of this closed loop system of you use a bottle of shampoo and you finish it and you send it back. Like there are pieces that are not helpful to our environment. It is better in that we're not creating more packaging, but it's also, in 20 years we might evolve and it might change, but it is a way to get people to think about it instead of being unintentional with what they're doing. And
yeah.
I think that that's an important part of it. I mean, I even struggled putting the word good in the name of this project, Capitalism for Good, because I don't want anything to be like, this is good and this is bad and it's black and white, because that's not realistic for the world we live in.
It's not. When I was when I was in my 20s and first getting into local food related work, I think that I had a lot of more my ideas were more purist. And
Yeah.
they didn't stay that way for long. I don't think I was never a person who believed that everything should be organic, for example.
Hmm.
But I did have a little bit more clear cut ideas about what farms to prioritize and whatnot. And my ideas have shifted. And I don't think that any part of that personally was, I don't think any part of that is a selling out. It's just a recognition that sometimes to preserve what's here, we have to move with things as they are.
Mm.
So, for example, it is better to preserve farms and farmland and farmers and farming communities, even if those farming communities are not using organic regenerative practices, even if I
Mm.
personally think it would be great if they did.
Yeah.
Because if we lose that farmland and we lose that farm knowledge, we don't have a chance to come back and, the odds that that's going to become an organic farm later after it has ceased to be a farm whatsoever
Right.
is very small.
Nope. It'll be a neighborhood.
It'll be a neighborhood.
Yeah.
And so moving towards the better thing by starting where we are, and at Urban Agrarian, there was a time when when we sourced almost exclusively locally. So winter came and our shelves, our produce case specifically, would get really bare.
Yeah.
We didn't supplement. And that was the case for the business for a really long time. And for a while, after joining, I was like, oh, yes, this is the way. But when the pandemic came,
Mm.
a couple of things happened at the same time. For one, we wanted to be a more complete option for our own staff and our customers so that you didn't have to go to a bigger store during the
Yeah.
pandemic. But we also just saw like, oh, wow, it's not, this is not a business. This is not a thing.
Mm.
And, we need to have consistent food if we're going to be a food store.
Yeah.
And it seems obvious to me now that we needed to supplement that some.
Yeah.
But, if Urban Agrarian goes away, then none of this good happens. And so
Yeah.
there are some things like that. So we try not to overlap. If there's local apples available, we don't buy other apples.
Mm.
But if there's no local apples, then now we buy apples. And
Yeah.
this might seem so obvious to so many people. The fact that for so many years we didn't do that is, a form of, yeah,
Yeah.
very strong principles. And, but there's a
Yeah.
lot of things. I think that about our food pricing also. sometimes if it's, when we say, oh gosh, I hate to have to charge this much for the ground beef or whatever. It's like, well, yeah, but we just need to, or, urban agrarian needs to exist.
Yeah.
I believe that. So we need to try and charge what's going to be sustainable for the store.
Yeah. Okay, I've got one more question before I get to my last question, but it's going to take us over time. Are you okay with that?
I'm fine. Yeah. And I
Okay.
should also answer your question about our other thing that we had to let go of too. That
Oh,
made us.
yeah. Well, let's start with that before I drag us into something else.
Yeah. Well, I'll just to kind of the urban agrarian story is not complete because here we are still going, but I'll say that I was telling you how we started off as a business with a focus on wholesale,
Hmm.
nearly shut down, gave up the wholesale, but this hope that we had of opening a new store was what brought us back from the brink and
Hmm.
allowed us to raise money. And we did. We opened a new store in Edmond, which is a northern
Yeah.
suburb in Oklahoma City. And we operated that store for 6 years. And then almost exactly a year ago, we shut it down.
Mm.
And so that was, you asked, do we have any, things that have made it easier to be, financially sustainable over time? And those things that we gave up are the two big things that I can point to that have given us at least a shot of
Yeah.
climbing out of the hole. So leaving wholesale behind, I still think was the right decision that Matt made. And as it sits now, I firmly believe that giving up our Edmond store, which was just this shining hope of how we would survive, but giving that up has been positive for the business. And so it's hard to recognize those moments, but it never took off like we needed it to. We didn't have the marketing for it. It just didn't. There's a lot of things going on with why that might have happened. And we gave it 6 years, which frankly was probably a little too long.
Yeah.
But
You gave it your all.
we gave it what we had.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's, but I think that we're at least keeping our heads barely above water this year without that store and the resources that we've diverted. Another, I think an important shift that I've made in my thinking too, that is so relevant for your project and conversations is that early on, I was saying I was kind of a purist about some things, or more of a purist. And I also was so focused on the farming community. I came to this from this idea of being a farmer's daughter.
Yeah.
And I was so focused on how we could help farms. But I've also realized over time that I slowly care way less about farms. And I don't want to make it, I don't want any of the farmers listening to think that I don't care anymore. I just care when it came to why I was coming to work and why I liked doing this.
Yeah.
I care so much more about the people working with us inside of Urban Agrarian. I care so much more about our employees. I care so much more about the community, and more is not more than the farms, but more than I used to. And I think that that's where my concern now as a business owner is rooted. And farms are their own businesses, and we'll always be a locally sourced grocery store. The local farms, that's our reason for being, but it's not actually the reason that I enjoy running a business. I enjoy running a business because I can work with people and work collectively internally, even if there's just 10 of us working here towards what's hopefully collective growth of us as individuals and people. And I always say that on a good day, my job is just selling food to my friends.
Yeah.
We build a community around us. A lot of the people we know by name who come into shop. And it's very old fashioned. It's like, well, my role in the community is and those who work alongside me, we all have this role that we're going to round up the best food we can find. We're going to sell it to our friends. We'd love to make more friends.
Yeah.
But that's the core for me at this point. So that evolution, even though we gave up one of our stores, we've kept a lot of those connections, and that shift in my thinking has been really instrumental, I think, to how I make decisions. If you're farm focused, you're really also making decisions that relate to someone else's business.
Yeah.
If you're customer and employee focused, well, then you're running Urban Agrarian.
Yeah.
Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
Uh-huh.
So,
And that is exactly where what I wanted to touch on is like, what's your thought process and your philosophy on your internal community and like keeping your employees satisfied and stable and keeping all of like your internal community working?
well, I'm not always good at it, but I'm trying to be better.
Yeah.
I think that there's nothing that's been good for, there's nothing like owning a business for personal growth.
Mm.
So I
Hmm.
think, I think it's one of my favorite things about owning a business and particularly doing it with someone else. It's, Matt, doing this with Matt for so many years, it's interesting because I have a husband who is not Matt, a separate human who I
Yeah.
live with. But then I have this work human
Yeah.
who also happens to be a man. And I think it would be a similar dynamic, honestly, if he wasn't. But it's like, okay, when I see struggles that pop up in both relationships, it's like, okay, this is probably me.
Hmm.
This one is me. I'm seeing consistently, running this household,
Interesting.
running this business.
Yeah.
This is happening. That must be what I'm bringing to this. That's working or not working.
Yeah. It's repetition and like information gathering. Yeah.
Yes, yes. And so it's I see what is all of life and what we're doing, if not a place to evolve.
Hmm.
And I don't think it's selfish of me to say that I enjoy my business for that reason. Um, and I want that to be what everybody else is there for too.
Yeah.
And where I fail is I'll be honest, I don't think that like we're not good at having it's I don't have documents that say this. I don't have things that explain. It's not like you get onboarded at Urban Agrarian and I'm like, here you go. Here's a beautiful manual that's going to explain who
Yeah.
we are and what this vision is. But I do, and I think we all do try to live that.
Mm.
I do tell people that I want you to be able to show up at Urban Agrarian as a human being
Yeah.
and have human problems. And where that can go a little wrong is if your human problems are so consuming that I can't be a human being. Like if
Mm.
you can't
Hmm.
show up, you literally can't make it in the door today or tomorrow or 3 times next week. Pretty soon, I'm not allowed to be a human being. I'm not allowed to go home and pick up
Right.
my daughter from school and make dinner because I'm just covering. And so there
Yeah.
are limits. um,
Yeah.
but I want it to be a place where where people can grow as humans. We also can get in some really deep philosophical conversations and have a lot of laughs. And so I like that about it. And I want to maintain that. And if it ceases to be that kind of environment, at least some of the time, it can't always feel that way.
Yeah.
Um, but then it's not going to be of interest to me. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It
Mm-hmm.
seems like that almost parallels really well with what you were talking about with the external community and the
Yeah.
customers and that personalization. Like at the end of the day, is it all just about relationships? And some of it's conflict resolution. Sometimes it's adjusting and adapting to something that's going on, whether it's in your husband's life or your partner at work or your employee or your customer's life that's coming in and they're like, I've got this problem, or I really need to find 400 tomatoes tomorrow, or like whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's all like problem solving in relationships.
It really is. And for our customers, I took part in a really great course a couple of years ago for
Mm.
business owners, and they said, what you're trying to do really is explain to customers what problem you're solving in their lives.
Mm.
And that's a nice reframe for me because so many of us in the local food community, if you're not careful, you're just saying a lot of things around like, well, you should do this,
Yeah.
you need to do this. And in your interview with the founder of Dip hair care
Mhm.
products, she was talking about how you can't come at people with a seagull and with plastic stuck in its beak and tell them that that's
Uh-huh.
why they need to buy shampoo. They need to buy shampoo because it's good shampoo.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
so I try to say, you need to come to Urban Agrarian because it's good food.
Mm.
And hopefully also because you like to see us, you
Yeah.
like the way it feels to be there.
Yeah.
So that's also a need beyond, good apples and radishes. So
Yeah. I love that so
Mhm.
much. It's just like it's the warm and fuzzies, I think, in
We
a not
try.
professional term, it's the way you feel when you walk
We
into a place.
try.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're about to have one of my very favorite weeks for warm and fuzzies, which is Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
It's so nice to sell food the week of Thanksgiving
Yeah.
because for one, it can be busy and it always feels best when it's busy. We all love being there when we're
Right.
actually selling food. And to
Yeah.
be honest, we have some really slow days. Um,
Yeah.
but when we're really selling food, it feels great when people trust us with their Thanksgiving turkey. And especially when they want the tips, they're like,
Mm-hmm.
when we get into the conversation about whether we're dry brining,
Yeah.
or we're wet brining, like what are we going to do with this bird?
Yeah.
That's like peak warm fuzzy. So.
Yeah. Can we get a taste of that? Can we get a little like minute or two of like what are your favorite Thanksgiving tips? What are your favorite things to do or like something new that you're going to try this year?
It's a good question. For one, like, I tell people all the time, give your turkey plenty of time to thaw. It's going to take more
Mm.
time than you think. Like you might need 5 days.
Yeah.
It's a lot. Give your bird plenty of time to thaw. I personally am a fan of a dry brine because for one, just practically speaking, I don't know who has, well, okay, so I have space to wet brine a bird because I own a commercial walk-in
Yeah.
refrigerator. No one else does.
Right.
But I still don't do that because then I've got this sloshy,
Yeah.
you know, it's just a whole thing. And so I don't know. I actually don't know how anyone quite figures that out at home.
Mm.
The sloshy poultry water brine situation.
Yeah.
Um, rubbing some herbed salt under the skin and on top of the skin, doing that has always served me pretty well.
Yeah.
Um, so those are my basic turkey thoughts. Spatchcock it, except for that's really hard to do. That's when you split the bird open.
Mm.
I've always heard it said that that's really a good way to make a bird that's still presentable. It's a step short of cutting it all up.
Yeah.
But it can be if your bird is very big, like actually, like your kitchen shears might not do the job of like cutting down that
Mm.
backbone like you need to be able to lay it open. I learned that the hard way last year. Just trying to do it in myself versus like
Yeah.
having our butcher in our kitchen help. So,
Yeah.
um, what am I trying this year? I also am a writer for Edible OKC magazine as my side project. And this year in our holiday issue, I revived and researched a holiday recipe that my mom and aunt used to make. That's like a frozen cranberry. It's
Oh.
almost a sorbet.
Yeah.
And it's not an ice cream exactly, but I have not actually made that as an adult. But I wrote about it in the magazine, and I'm have an ambition to make that this year. So we'll
Yeah.
see. It's really easy. It's like one of those like can of this, can of that sort of recipes. So
I think you just inspired
no
me to try
local.
that this year.
There might be nothing. There might be nothing local in it,
That's
but yeah.
okay. Okay, I think that's also a really good spot. There are so many other questions that I could have gotten into. I think that you and I could have talked for an hour alone just about like the sustainability piece and low waste and reusing all the things and the travel and the cultural differences between New York and Oklahoma. And there are just so many things that I think I could talk to you about. But in an attempt to kind of wrap it up, my last question that I have for absolutely everyone is who's another business or leader that you see out there in the world that is doing things the right way? And it could be anyone, a coach, a mentor, an employee of yours, someone that you're a customer of, absolutely anyone that you think deserves a shout out.
I thought about this because I knew you were going to ask, and there are just really so many, and it's also hard to know until you're inside of an organization how something's really
Yeah.
going.
Yeah.
Um, but so there are so many locally that I admire, but I started to realize too, I will just mention that I got to do a business course. I referenced this just a minute ago with a group called the Matisse Group here in Oklahoma City. And so I'll mention the Matisse Group because it's one of those situations in life where you hear about something and then you realize it's everywhere.
Yeah.
Several years ago, I heard about this group of women who own a business consulting firm in Oklahoma City called the Matisse Group. I'd never heard of them before in all my years in Oklahoma City. And then suddenly I realized that they were sort of a powerhouse tool behind so many of the businesses that I loved and respected. And I was able to participate for free through a scholarship, as were most of the business owners in this course that went for 3 months. And so I met other business owners, got to connect with them, and then I'm in an ongoing sort of business support group.
Yeah. Cool.
And so many, and it's all women in my group. It wasn't all women in the course. It's not female specific, although it's a female led organization. But
Mhm.
there are so many women in that room who I respect, and other people that I know who've connected with them. And so the list could go on, because I think what they help businesses do is have a business that runs within integrity and effective business communication,
Mhm.
positive internal dynamics. And so through them, I've met all these other businesses that are working on this. We're all in
Yeah.
this path together of trying to create something that's going to really run well and serve our community and serve our people. And I see them really trying to, they reached out to me and asked me to join the course. One of the
Yeah.
women there, Sherry in particular, was like, hey, come into this fold. And so I think they're really trying to actively work with businesses here in Oklahoma City to make the whole of the city better.
Mhm.
And so I really admire their work. In another life, I would want to be one of their partners. Because I admire what they do. So
We're all about it's such a like a cheesy term these days, but like manifesting it, and if you want to be a part of it, well, we can make it happen. It's still a possibility.
yeah.
Chelsey, thank you so much for doing this. I truly mean it when I say I think that I could monopolize your time and to you for like hours and hours because there are so many other questions that I have for you. And I love learning about your background and what you've been doing with Urban Agrarian and just can't thank you enough for taking the time to speak with me today.
You're so welcome. I think this is a really nice project, and I'm glad that you emailed me and invited me, into the fold. It's nice. I know you're on your way to 50, no, sorry, on your way to 100 businesses, right? So
Yeah.
that's, yeah, I'm honored to be one of them. Did you find